I've been practicing a lot of jazz standards from one of the real books recently, and it's got me thinking. The melodies for most of the well-known jazz standards are written out very simply in the real books. If you played the melodies exactly as they're written in the sheet music, they would sound very basic and boring. Apparently, a lot of the songs in the real books were intentionally simplified in order to sell more copies, which kind of makes sense because they would appeal to a wider audience. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 ways that you can embellish a written melody line to make it sound more interesting. I'm going to be using one of my favourite jazz standards, All the Things You Are, as an example in this video. If you do enjoy the video today, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. With that being said, let's jump straight into it. The first idea is to try playing around with the rhythm and the time feel. Think of the sheet music as more of a guide rather than something you should strictly follow. In order to come up with interesting variations on the rhythm, firstly we need to listen to a few recordings to get some nice ideas. These recordings can be any instrument, you don't have to limit yourself to just saxophone recordings. Pick one recording that you really like and then listen to it on repeat until you can sing along with the melody line. Singing is a really powerful tool, and if you can sing an interesting melody line, then chances are you can play one on the saxophone too. The aim is to almost sing the melody line in your head and match it with your playing. I'm going to play an example for you now. To start with, I'll play the rhythm straight exactly as it's written on the sheet music, and then I'll play the melody line with a bit more of an interesting rhythm, playing it more how I would sing it. The second idea to add some more interest to your melody lines is to add in some approach notes. An approach note is essentially an extra note that we add in before playing the target note. They lead us to the target note. Target notes are usually chord tones, but for the purposes of this video, if a note is written out in the melody line, we can assume that it's a target note. One idea is to add in an approach note that's a half step below the target note. For example, we might decide to add in an approach note before this A. So A is our target note and our approach note would be a G sharp, half step below the A. We don't want to hold this approach note, the G sharp, as it would clash with the underlying chord and wouldn't sound very nice. It's just played as a passing tone to reach the target note A. We can also add in diatonic approach notes. For example, a common diatonic approach note that's used is the note that's one note above the target note in the scale. For example, we could add a diatonic approach note before this B flat. The melody in this bar is played over a B flat major chord, so we would play C as our approach note, C being one note above B flat in the B flat major scale. A variation on this idea is adding in approach notes that are chord tones. Now, chord tones are obviously also diatonic notes, but they have the advantage that they'll sound very melodic. So if you want to, you can afford to take your time on these and hold them a bit longer before playing the target note. For example, we could play a chord tone before this D. The melody is played over a B flat major 7 chord in this bar. So in this example, I'm going to play an F as the chord tone approach note, which is the 5th of B flat major. The third idea that you can use to create more interesting melody lines is to add in some chromatic runs between notes. You can use chromatic runs to link 2 notes in the melody together. These notes can have a small or a large interval. Just use your ears and decide what you think sounds good. There are 2 types of chromatic runs that go up, ascending, and chromatic runs that go down, descending. I wouldn't go crazy and add too many chromatic runs, as the melody might start to sound a little bit weird if they're overused, but the odd one or two tastefully added sounds very nice. In this example, I'm adding in a short ascending chromatic run between this F and this A. The fourth idea to add some interest back into your melody lines is to add in some chromatic embellishments. Now, these probably have technical names in classical music which I'm not familiar with, but to me a chromatic embellishment simply involves a target note and the notes a half step above and a half step below that target note. In many ways they share a lot in common with chromatic approach notes, like the example I gave earlier, but they're a bit sort of frillier sounding, and unlike approach notes, you start and finish on the target note. An example would be we want to embellish this C sharp, so this is our target note. Start by playing a C sharp, then play a D a half step above, back to C sharp, and then C natural a half step below, and finally back to C sharp. And we're playing this relatively quickly so that it sounds like a nice little embellishment. Another simpler example would be we want to embellish this E natural. Start on E, our target note, then play F natural a half step above, and then back to E. So in this example, we're only using the note a half step above the note that we want to embellish. We can also play the opposite of this example using a target note and the note a half step below. The fifth and final idea to spice up your melody lines is to add in some improvised licks. The idea here is to fill in some of the gaps in the melody line with a few short phrases. Again, don't go too crazy with this. I think it's important that you can still hear the underlying melody line clearly. The easiest way to incorporate this idea is by adding licks where there are long held notes in the melody line, but equally you can add in licks wherever you think sounds good. If you're new to improvising over chord changes, then one trick is to use the same notes as the notes in the written melody line to improvise with. Here's an example of me adding in a short lick over this held F sharp. The underlying chord is a D major 7 chord, so I'll be using a standard D major scale to improvise with. It's the tasteful combination of all these ideas that will bring your melody lines to life. I think less is more when it comes to stuff like this, so try not to overuse any one of these ideas, and at the end of the day, use your ears and play what you think sounds nice. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, I really appreciate it. See you next time.